Okay. Well, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for our last session of Start Something series. We've been taking a deep dive into customer discovery. The series has been designed to equip you with practical strategies to help you set you up for success as you start your own venture. My name is Jean. I'm the Programs and Events Director at the Iowa State University Papa John Center for Entrepreneurship. Our weekly Start Something webinar series is designed to support and inspire entrepreneurs at every stage of their journey. Before we dive in, a few quick housekeeping notes. This session is being recorded, and we'll send you the link tomorrow and add this to our YouTube video channel. And to keep the background noise to a minimum, please stay muted during the presentation, but this is meant to be an interactive session, so please unmute and join in when you have a question. In today's session, Alex Andrade, the director of ISU CyBIZ Lab, will take us through crafting and analyzing effective surveys. Surveys are powerful tools in customer discovery, but only if you ask the right questions and know how to use the data afterwards. Today, Alex will discuss how to design impactful surveys and translate customer feedback into strategic decisions. Alex, thank you for joining us today, and I'll pass this over to you so you can give us a brief on your background with CyBIZ Lab and take us through the surveys. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you, Jean. And since we got a pretty small group, an intimate group, just like Jean said, feel free to type in some questions to the chat or raise your hand. We're happy to call upon you during this presentation. But like Jean said, my name is Alex Andrade. I am the program director of CyBIZ Lab. And if you're not familiar with CyBIZ Lab or even who I am, here's a little bit of a 101 on me. CyBIZ Lab is a program where we hire students to work on market research projects with industry. And it started in 2013. And since then, we've done over 350 professional marketing research projects. So I've been there since the beginning. Actually, was a student at Iowa State myself. I ran a small coffee shop while I was an undergrad. So if you, just a little trivia here, that's me right there with the arrow. Back when I had hair on my head and not on my face. So that's our group who started the student-run coffee shop out of Iowa State. So, but I also help co-teach the MBA service learning projects through the MBA course with Sarah Wilson at Iowa State Ivy College of Business. And as Jean probably can attest to, I am considered the IT expert as deemed by my Papa John Center colleagues. So I think I'm pretty well qualified to talk about surveys today. A little bit about just CyBIZ Lab, just those who are interested, because I got to plug our program too. We do charge for our services. We charge a $6,000 rate for about 300 hours of work during the semester. And we work on all types of projects with all sizes of companies. Typically, it's a team of 4 students, undergrad and grad students with all different types of backgrounds working on these projects. And many of the projects we do are surveys. We launch surveys, distribute them, and analyze the data to help make different companies more assured of their strategic planning and different kind of marketing strategies that they want to implement for entering new markets or having a new product line and things like that. So that's enough about me. And the reason you're all here today is because you've decided that you want to make a survey. And in customer discovery, there are many ways to do it, but this is probably one of the many ways you've come to a conclusion, hey, this is a good way to get a lot of data all at once with maybe not as much effort as doing one-on-one conversations with individuals. Well, note what we're going to go over today might persuade you, hey, this actually does take quite a lot of work and thought to create a survey. So I broke up today's topic into kind of 4 categories. First, you got to start off with explaining what is data, what kind of data we want to collect. So we're going to go through a little bit of 101 of data. And then survey design, essentially the structure of a survey, what you can expect on how surveys are taken online specifically. And then how to craft your questions in a way that doesn't elicit bias on the data that you're getting. And then also how to analyze said data. And that data being used to help you make different decisions, whether it be on marketing or target audience or any kind of messaging. We're going to go through a little bit of how that can be done through the analysis of your results on your survey. So let's start off with data itself. Okay. So what type of data exist? And you probably have heard of this before. You've got your basic data categories of your qualitative and your quantitative. And just a little refresher here, your qualitative data is essentially anything that's more, I want to say like feedback or conversational, right? It may be some conversation you had with somebody. It could be an observation you made through reading a news article. It could be some individual experience you had working in that industry, right? It's less about putting a number to it and more about kind of like a general understanding of whatever you're trying to study. And then you have your quantitative data. And the reason I put this slide up here is because you cannot just count on pure quantitative data to help you make decisions. Your qualitative is really going to give a lot of context to how the data that you're gathering in these types of surveys, typically like the number of responses based on a question you asked, is going to inform a decision you're going to make based on your business and the data you're receiving. But not only do we break up data into two categories, but there are more even than these four. I like this graphic because it shows you kind of a hierarchy of type of data. But in terms of usefulness, data does have essentially usefulness based on what type it is. And this is what I mean by usefulness is how easy is it to analyze in the end. So you got your nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio. And I'll explain them here in a bit, but your ratio, what this graphic shows, is essentially the best data to analyze. It doesn't mean every question you're going to ask or craft is going to be to gather ratio data. It's just I want you guys to know that ratio data is probably the easiest to use when you're making decisions and analyzing. So let's kind of go over these real quick because we're going to be referencing it back throughout the different types of questions that I'm going to show you how to design. So your nominal data is defined as very basic, and it's a way to category data without a really much of a, I want to say, uh, spacing between. So it's least informational and it's very about qualitative, right? So a good example, it's better for me to explain these in examples, is if we're talking about age, if you ask the question what generation you are, you got baby boomer, X, Z, millennial. And the reason this is nominal is because no matter how many different marketing firms you talk to, you're never going to get an agreement on when those birth dates are for a baby boomer, X, Z, millennial, right? They kind of shift depending what kind of information you're looking at. So it's a little harder to define somebody's age in these categories because they might intersect in between them. While ordinal data is much more categorical and really easy to prioritize and put a ranking to. So a better example of for ages is something like an age bracket, where you're asking people to select, right, based on their age, where they fit in. Here we have brackets from under 18 all the way to above 55. Another good example of ordinal data is your education level, right? It's not necessarily like a number associated to your education. We're not asking for a GPA here, but it starts with a GED or high school diploma all the way up to a PhD, and there's an order based on the number of years you spent in education. Interval data, on the other hand, is more about numbers, right? And so when you're asking for a question in which they can place a number to it, and there's an equal distance between each category or number, that's what you call an interval. Also, interval is 0 is meaningful. So some examples here are things like temperature or time. So the 0 is meaningful is important because that's the difference between interval and ratio. For temperature, for example, 0 degrees has a meaning. It doesn't mean lack of temperature, like no temperature at all. It means a specific type of, cold weather, essentially. So that's what an interval. And then ratio, on the other hand, is very similar to interval. The only difference is that your 0 means it is absent of data. And that's really useful when analyzing, as we'll talk about later, because when somebody doesn't put in information, it means that they either skip the question or that they don't have an answer to it, right? Versus if you put 0 for a temperature, that can have some meaning in that sense. So just a little quick overview of data. Now I want to get into our survey design and our process and structure. So when you're crafting your survey, I've kind of broken down some steps on what to think of when you're beginning this process. And in your first step, I call is planning. There's always needs to be some questions you ask yourself on how do you come up with your survey questions in the first place, right? You have to ask questions to create your questions. So what I've got here is 4 questions here. How would the data be used? Essentially, what is the purpose of the survey in the first place? Is it to help you with your marketing? Is it to help you with your pricing? Like, really give yourself an objective. What type of data are you looking for? That's important because you can think of it like, is it qualitative? Is it quantitative? Do I want more ratio data for various types of questions that will help me understand my pricing better versus if I just give ranges of prices? Think that through, and that will help you understand what you want to get out of the survey. And then the last 2 are all about the audience. So who has the data and how do you get it? That will be the questions based on distribution of the survey and how that audience will perceive your survey when you put it in front of them. Step 2 then is then giving yourself a goal. In academia, we have something called statistical significance. And since we're talking about surveys for businesses, you don't necessarily have to hit that statistical significant number. So then you want to give yourself a goal that is going to make you feel confident in your survey with the number of responses you've given, but also isn't going to be daunting enough that you have to get 1,000 answers in order to make a decision, right? So my suggestion is get as many as you can and just be understanding. It is a representative group that you're getting your information from, and you can always send the survey out more. So getting 100 answers or even like 400 is kind of around the area that you're looking for like confidence in your survey. Step 3 is then crafting it. And this is the honestly most time consuming part because you're going to go back and forth on different questions. And then you definitely want to test it before sending it out because once you send it out in step 4, call it distribution day, there is no going back, especially with digital surveys. Once you send it out to a large audience, you have no way of taking it back. And if you make changes to your survey while it's also been distributed, you're going to affect the results. So then you're going to have a lot of back end work afterwards to make sure that your people you sent it to isn't the wrong audience, right? If you sent it to the wrong people in that case. So this is my definition of 4 steps. So let's get into the structure. So before we get started into the rest of like how a survey should look, I want to give you guys an example of how an online survey saves data. So whenever you get a survey in your email and you click on the link to take it, the way the survey collects data is based on you hitting, like, let's say I decide my favorite color is blue here, and you clicking the next button or the finish button. And when you do that, and you move to the next page, that survey is saving that data on the back end for the person to see it. Now, every time you skip out of that window, let's say you hit the X button and you don't hit that finish button, you are losing that data. That person's information is no longer captured. All right. So I want you to think of that because if you put too many questions on a single page, like it's an endless scroll of questions, and someone in the middle of taking your survey decides this is too much for me and they don't hit the next button, all that data is lost. Okay. That's important to note when designing your survey. So in the structure of a survey, there's always several different components to think of. You want to start off with an introduction. So kind of like what we did here. Introduce who you are, what your company is, why you're asking for it. Maybe if you have an incentive, you definitely want to mention in this part of the survey, it would be just in text or in the email itself. And the incentive would be like a gift card or some sort of monetary incentive that if they take their survey, they're into, to get it. You definitely want to promote that if you're doing that. If not, having this information in the beginning is going to be helpful alone too. And then also telling them about how much time it will take to take the survey. After your introduction, this is where you're going to prioritize the most important questions you want them to answer first. Because as I mentioned, if they do not click on the next button, you're going to lose that data. So you want your most important questions answered first. So if they decide later on the survey to drop off, that you have that data. There is a caveat to personal information, and I'll show you that here in the next one. Then after you prioritize questions, you're going to have your other questions listed out in category. So think of your questions as thematic, right? I like to say think in blocks. These questions are about maybe pricing. These questions are about consumption habits, whatever it may be. Kind of keep them together, because if you go too over the top of next question is very different from the other question, it might confuse people. We tend to keep the demographics and personal questions like contact info towards the end or on separate pages alone from other types of questions, for that very reason of people dropping off really quickly. The reason we keep these at the end too is if people don't want to answer those questions, then you have the data from all the other questions they answered, and they don't have to give you their contact info, right? So you want to keep all those typically towards the end. And then always finish with a thank you. This not only is, just polite, but also it shows that the survey's done and they don't have to worry about, hey, did I miss any questions? So with that, let's kind of get into crafting these questions. All right. So I wanted to start off with something called bias, all right, survey bias in general. It's a real thing and it can affect the type of information you're getting based on how you address questions. So I have a little definition here I took from Cambridge. Cognitive bias. Okay, so cognitive bias is the way a particular person understands events, facts, and other people with their base, which is based on their own particular set of beliefs and experiences that may not be reasonable, accurate, or the same as your own, right? So pretty self-explanatory. All of us are coming to the table with different experiences and also are influenced by everything around us. Therefore, cognitive bias is a big deal when analyzing data. So I have a question for those in the audience here. How many different cognitive biases are there? I just want to get a feel for what you guys think. Go ahead and put it in the chat. There's been attempts to count the number of them by psychologists. Yeah.
I'll say 200.
200. Okay.
Unlimited. Olivia says unlimited.
Unlimited. Interesting. Yeah, you would think that maybe there are some out there that we haven't found yet. And Gene, actually, you're pretty close. It's about 180 that have been found so far. And I say plus two because of that unlimited factor in a way, because we're continuously finding more biases that we have. Just to kind of visualize that. That was overwhelming, but this is an attempt to create a map of all the different cognitive biases human beings have. So as you can see, there are some big categories here, from our own ability to remember things, right? Our brains are not the best sometimes at remembering things, and there's a lot of biases attributed to that. All the way to information overload or not enough information, biasing our decisions and thoughts. And then also the situation, right? Like if we have to make a decision really quickly, we may have some biases towards one thing and favoring another based on the timeline that we have around us. And then, of course, meaning there. Human beings will always look for meaning for things. And we live in a world where some things actually happen with no meaning behind it, yet we still try to look for it, right? So this is overwhelming. Trying to cover every single bias out there in your survey to make sure that you don't hit it is near impossible. So here are my top 3 most common survey biases you will see based on the different 180 plus biases that exist. And I want to cover these real quick, and then I have a little video for you guys to watch after this to see if you can see these biases in the video. So anchoring bias, that is one you've probably seen a lot, but never put a name to. This is essentially you put a heavily rely on the first piece of information that's given to you. So a good example of this I have here is a sale. Okay, you probably go into Walmart or other places and you see this used to be X amount of dollars and now it's only this amount of dollars. Well, not only is that a marketing trick, but it's a marketing trick to essentially anchor your decision to say, hey, I'm getting a deal because this was actually priced at a higher amount before, when in fact it probably was always that price in the begin with. So don't trust all the marketing you see. Confirmation bias is coming in with more of that, we probably know about this a little bit more, coming in with a pre-existing belief. And because you understand that belief, if anything contradicts it or challenges it, you're less likely to believe it, right? So I have an example here of, let's say you're analyzing your data and you put in a question, they're asking them what's the person's adaptability or how often do they like using new technology, right? That is a great question to understand where the person's coming from their personal thoughts. And so if your product or service is a technology, you would want to know if they are what I would call a technophobe, somebody completely against new technology. So if they were to give you a negative comment about it, you can understand where they're coming from and either regard that or disregard that comment, right? So people come into preconceived biases in that. And then I have here an attribution substitution. It's a fancy word for just saying we tend to choose the most simplest answer for things rather than a more complicated one. And this also goes to like answering the question in the first place. If the question is too complicated, people will probably simply skip over it rather than answering it. So these are kind of the three most common ones I see. There are a few more examples I'll show in a bit, but I want to show you guys this video here, and I'm just going to play it. I'll pause it a couple times to get your guys' thoughts, but let's go ahead and watch this Words Matter video.
We're on location of a movie set in the 1950s. Complete with cameras, bossy director, and on-set police for security. We've also invited a group of spectators to watch the filming. Pay attention along with them as the crew gets the final shot of the movie. Try to remember what you see.
There we go. Final shot, everyone. Action.
Keep watching. Everything you see is fair game.
Watch out for the car! Cut!
Okay, that wasn't part of the movie. Did you catch what just happened? I know, it was a lot to take in. But we're going to let you in on a little secret. The actors, director, crew, and police are all in on it. Everyone, in fact, except our spectators. And former Las Vegas Police Sergeant Chris Curtis is here to test your memory. He's going to ask you and our other witnesses 3 questions about what you just saw. Ready?
What color was the car that got hit?
Think.
All right, real quick in the chat. What color was the car that got hit? So this car here. Before we move forward, because I think they give the answer.
Olivia says blue.
Okay, blue.
Anybody else want to say a color? Green.
Right. Green? Okay, blue and green. Let's see what it was.
Back and try to be accurate. Got your answer?
Did you say blue? Good, that's correct. Next question. How fast do you think the car was going when it bumped into the other car?
What do you think? Was the red car going 10, 15, 20, 30, or 40 miles an hour?
I'll pause right here. Put your answers into the chat now.
I say 10 miles an hour. Olivia says 20.
20. Okay.
And that's all we have.
That's it? All right. Let's see what it is.
Got your answer? Did you guess around 20 miles an hour? If so, you agree with 80% of people we showed this video to. Before we reveal if you're correct or not, let's see what our spectators have to say.
How fast would you say the car was going when it smashed into the other car?
I'd say 40.
Between 40 and 50.
It was going about 30 miles an hour.
Definitely 50 miles an hour.
These people think the speed was really high. Is that what you thought? Or did you think it was much lower? It turns out the actual speed was 20 miles an hour. Is that what you guessed? So why were our eyewitnesses so much higher? The thing is, only some of our witnesses guessed high. Others were much closer to the real speed.
How fast do you think the car was going when it bumped into the other car?
Probably about 10, 15 miles per hour.
15 miles per hour.
15 miles an hour?
Yeah.
Okay, how can this guy think it's 50
Between 40 and 50.
and this guy think it's 15?
15 miles per hour.
Okay. Why do you think that is? Before I move it forward, anybody have a idea of why they are so different in their speeds?
Feel free to unmute if you want to answer.
I think maybe if, it was kind of like if the people that were watching it were it seemed kind of like startled by it, I feel like they would probably say that it was going faster and kind of making it a bigger deal than it was. And then I think the people that were saying lower were kind of actually more calm in the situation and weren't willing to just say the easy answer. Because if you see a car crash, you're probably going to assume that, oh, it was going way faster than it was. I guess that's my
Yeah.
take on it.
No, that's a great observation. That definitely could be a part of it too. Anybody else? All right, well, let's see what the video has to say.
After all, they both saw the same crash, but if you've been paying attention, you'd know it's not the crash that matters, it's the question. Listen carefully to Sergeant Curtis.
How fast would you say the car was going when it smashed into the other car? How fast do you think the car was going when it bumped the other car?
Did you catch it? He said smashed. To some witnesses,
Smashed into the other car, smashed into the other car, smashed, smashed, smashed into the other car.
and bumped to others, including you.
When it bumped the other car.
The word smashed actually increased the speed of the red car in our spectators' memory.
So I want to tell you, the actual speed of the accident was 20 miles an hour.
I don't believe that. That's crazy.
Yeah, that would surprise me.
It seemed like it was 30 miles an hour.
You're kidding, right?
That's a big difference.
It's incredible if you think about it. One word has the power to totally rewrite a memory. Don't feel bad if you got the speed of the car wrong. We're going to give you another chance to test your memory.
Final question. You saw the driver blow through a stop sign right after the accident. Yes or no?
Before we reveal the answer, let's see what our spectators have to say.
Did you see the car run through the stop sign after the accident?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, I saw him go through the stop sign.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, again, what do we think? Did they blow through the stop sign? Oh, that might.
No one's speaking up. Yes, not sure, said Olivia.
Yes, and not sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Watch the replay. Do you agree the driver ran through a stop sign? Look closely, and you can see it's actually a yield sign. Did Sergeant Curtis mess with your memory again? If so, you're not alone.
Would it surprise you to know that it was not a stop sign, but it was a yield sign?
Let's go back and check it out. I think it was a stop sign.
So what was going on in your brain when Sergeant Curtis manipulated your memory along with our participants? Experts call it the misinformation effect, and it reveals memories are never a perfect recall of an event.
Every time you receive new information from a trustworthy source, your brain reshapes your memory based on those details.
And memories formed under stress, like a car accident, are especially vulnerable to change.
Excellent. No, thank you for participating, everybody. So, let me just move to this question. So, as you can see from that video, not only are people influenced by the way you ask them questions, but like the stress that you mentioned, Olivia, has an effect on it too. But the authority figure also does as well. We're not to think that you're not susceptible to being guided towards a specific type of answer is to be a little bit of foolish because of the way we hear and process data. So just curious with you guys, quick question, feel free to unmute or type in the chat here. What type of bias did you see in the video? And we kind of covered a few of it, but here's a list of the ones that I showed previously. Feel free to throw that in the chat. And if anybody wants to come on mute, like, how was the bias introduced, right? And how does that apply to the surveys that we create?
Definitely say authority, because the first one, just because he was credited, cop. So I feel like that definitely had something to do with that. And then I would also say like attribute substitution, just because like the way that he was framing his questions, it was very much like, oh, did you see him blow that stop sign? And I feel like the easiest answer to say there is yes. And if it's so close, like a yield sign versus a stop sign, I feel like everyone's just going to say yes based on his like framing of questions, and maybe a little bit of confirmation, bias as well. If they believe that they saw something, and the way that he asks his question kind of goes with their beliefs, that they're going to kind of confirm that as well.
100%. Did you see the one guy who was just like, no, I'm pretty sure it was a stop sign, right? Like he not only was wrong, but doubled down on it. That was great. And yeah, this applies to not just like surveys too, but everything in life in a way, but we're going to try and keep it to surveys here. So no, I just wanted to do that little activity because it just shows how vulnerable we are in crafting surveys and also taking them onto different biases that exist out there. So let's dive into question types. I know we're about like halfway through this training, so I want to get into the meat of this. And I want to start off with some of the most important types of questions to make sure you include in a survey. And that is your demographics. And the main reason I like to talk about demographics to include these in the survey is because sometimes they're left out. But also, these are the types of questions that are going to allow you to analyze your data so you can start targeting specific people on what they like about your specific product or service. And so I'm just going to go through a few of these that I've got up here. And this is by far, I would say, a pretty good encapsulation of all the demographics you can get from somebody in a survey. Starting off with age, a couple ways to capture age. One is text entry, where they type in their age. But that can be a little bit too personal for some people who don't want to tell their exact age, especially if you're asking for their name. But it's a great way to get ratio data, as I mentioned, if you get the exact number, because then you can do like an average, you can do all types of tests to those numbers. Otherwise, age range brackets are perfectly fine. Asking their occupation, having a drop-down list of the most common industries that you're looking to capture information from, and then a job title. That's something that can either text entry, but having a drop-down list is much easier for you to analyze, and I'll get into that in a little bit. You also have location. I've seen the best way to capture location data is asking them to enter in their zip code. And for many different survey software out there, you can actually tell the software to say, make sure what they enter in here is an existing zip code. You can validate it, which is nice because then they won't type in something that isn't a zip code. State, country, etc. Income, I presented here an income brackets that you can utilize. Typically, you ask somebody what is their household income for that year, and then everywhere from under 15,000 to 200,000, and having brackets to that. I say you can stick to the U.S. Census, but if you're doing like a very I don't know, luxury type product or service, you may want to change the brackets there, but that's a very typical one. Asking sex, so male, female, other, prefer not to answer is typically what you put into that category to know what their sex is. And then education. So a way to frame that is, what is your highest obtained degree? And you list out on a multiple choice for them to choose one. So that you can understand what their education background is. So these demographic questions, as I mentioned, should go at the end of your survey. Now let's talk a little bit about the types of questions you can do and utilize. And this may be a little overwhelming because there's a lot of different types, but let's kind of go through them here. You have your multiple choice, which typically you can say select one of these choices or select all that apply. Whenever you're asking for them to select all that apply, make sure to put that in the question itself to make them aware of that. Multiple choice, I would say, is probably the easiest to analyze because you're looking at how many people responded to each answer. Well, also, it's really easy to take because most of us have taken tests through school or through DMV, getting a car license, etc. And doing a multiple choice is something you're used to. We prefer that probably over like an essay type question, right? Your Likert scale, you've probably seen these in surveys you've taken before if you've taken some, but this is saying, okay, on a scale, and we'll go into more detail how to develop these. How likely are you to purchase something? How satisfied are you? 1 to 0, or sorry, 1 to 5, 1 to 7, something like that. Text entry, this is when you have a blank text, a box, and somebody types something in. I will mention that text entry is the hardest to analyze, especially if you get a lot of responses. If you get, let's say, 1,000 responses, that's 1,000 text entry comments you have to look at. I'm going to give you some tools on how to analyze those text entries in a little bit, but I will say try and stay away from too many text entries. I think having 1 to 3 text entry questions on your survey is a good number, but having a survey that's all text entry, you're going to have people drop off of your survey really quickly. Nobody wants to write an entire essay, right? Sum total is a little different. This is like there are many different survey programs out there that allow you to total up a certain amount and don't let people go past, say, 100% or a specific number. This is great if you're asking somebody to tell you how much time they spent on social media platforms. Excuse me, in a single day. So that you could have the different types like Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, etc. Put a percentage of time during the day you spend on each one, and it has to total to 100%. Ranking allows you to ask people to categorize and prioritize different factors or products or whatever it may be. I highly suggest if you're using ranking, do not go more than 7 because after the first, I want to say 6 categories, people are not going to care which order they put things in, and it's pretty burdensome for them to do that. So if you're going to do more than 7 options in a ranking, turn it into a select all that apply multiple choice and ask them to select their top 4. That way you get them to decide what their top or top 3 even ones are without having to organize in order. And then from a lot of data coming in, you'll be able to parse out which ones was selected the most by their top 3. And then sliders, you've probably seen these. It's a great way to capture information from ranges from like 0 to 100, if it's a percentage, or maybe it's a price you're asking them. And anybody who puts over $200 is probably just trying to egg you on in the survey. So you give them a range to choose from. They're really great for touchscreens like phones and things. Not so much on computer using a mouse, but I've seen people still take a lot of surveys with sliders in it without a problem on a computer. So I wanted to go into some of these examples. We've got here the Likert scale, as I mentioned. This is an example of how to do a really well-written Likert scale. As you can see, it's an odd number. If you look here of points you can choose from, this is a agree or disagree Likert scale. You always want to have an odd number. 7 scale and 5 scale are the best. And with the odd number, you get a middle. All right. And the reason we want to have a middle of like an unsure or neither agree or disagree is because you don't want to bias someone and force them to make a decision if they're not sure, because that would then bias your answers towards people forcing them to make a decision when maybe they could be persuaded one way or the other. It's good to know those different categories of people who are on the fence, right? Another thing here you'll see is that your 2, 3, 5, and 6 don't have a text on the top of it. And you'll probably see varieties of these where it says like strongly disagree, somewhat disagree, disagree, all the way to strongly agree. Those could be somewhat subjective to people. So if you just keep it with a middle of a 1 and a 7 with opposing opposing scales, then you can have people understand, okay, if I choose a 5 or a 6, that is slightly disagreeing, and it's the same amount of space in between each one. So this way you can kind of get rid of that subjective bias of people thinking what is slightly agree, what is agree versus slightly agree. More examples of Likert scales are here. As you can see, there's tons of different Likert scales you can choose from, and not all of them have a neutral. The example I gave of the neutral is for more of the agreement or dissatisfaction. Sometimes, like for quality, you don't necessarily need a neutral. So you got from poor to excellent. So you can find these kind of resources online. A lot of universities have these examples and samples. So let's get into a little bit about multiple choice. Multiple choice do's and don'ts I have here. So I have basically 2 questions on my survey. One is, do you consume energy drinks while gaming? And it's a yes or no. And how frequently do you consume energy drinks while gaming? Well, in a survey, you're going to want to have as minimal questions as you can. And so honestly, the question below asks the same thing as the top one. So if you can get as much data from a question like this as possible, go for one of the questions here. And the reason is because your yes category here is basically all of these from 1 every 2 weeks to 5 a day. And your no category is none. And not only are you getting the same information as the yes or no question, but you're also getting information such as consumption habits and buying habits, which is very, very useful for whatever you're trying to sell. In this case, we're selling energy drinks. So if you can stay away from yes or no, there are certain cases where yes or no do make much more sense. But when you can, add a little bit more to it so you can get some more data. Also, some kind of miscellaneous multiple choice tips I have here. When designing your answers to a question, start by thinking of all the possible options someone could put, because you don't want somebody to be like, my answer isn't on here and I have nowhere to select it. But at the same time, if you can't think of every single possible answer, you can always use an other, right? Another, please specify with a text entry next to it, which is an option in many survey software, is really useful. Just note, you'll have to do some extra analysis for that other category because it's basically text entry again. Also, even though I just said you want to exhaust all your possible options, just note it's okay to exhaust, to not include every option, especially if they're going to be not chosen very often. So you can limit your questions to the most popular choices and still have an other option. The last thing you want is your other category to be chosen more often than the other ones that you list out in your multiple choice question, because that will just make more work for you to analyze. And then I said this already, surveys enjoys multiple choice over text entry. Couple more do's and don'ts about bias here. I got this from Harvard Business School. Here's an example of a leading question, which we saw in the video. Our product reduces tension by 10%. Would you like to buy it? So the leading part is we're already telling them what the product can do. And that's more of a marketing statement than maybe an actual like physical thing that they can see from the product itself. So this is not a neutral question. This is leading them into it. They'll probably say yes. And then if you try to get the same amount of people who said yes on a survey to buy your product, it probably won't match because of the way you've led them into this question. So that's an example of how you, if you want to get rid of this, my suggestion, this bias would be to get rid of our product reduces this, maybe show a video of the product without any text, just showing it, and just ask, how likely are you to buy this product, and give them a scale from very likely to unlikely. The ambiguous question, this is again about like text entry. If you just ask, how do you feel about your purchase, you're going to get all types of answers that may be hard to categorize. So consider asking this question in a Likert scale. How do you feel, or how satisfied are you with your purchase? And then you can have a scale that they can choose from, and it'll be easier to analyze. And then this last example I have here is the complex one, which is if you had to get work using a bike, a bus, train, or on foot, which would you choose? Consider annual participation, your transportation budget, and carpooling opportunities. Already, that's a lot to think of. If anything, this could be split up into two questions. One, how do you prefer to go to work? And then it lists out bicycle, bus, train, car, right? You don't need to put it in the question. It's in the answers. And then another question following up, why? Like consider annual precipitation, transportation, budget, etc., could be answered in their own words by just following up with a text entry to why do you travel by bus? Why do you travel by train? And then it allows them to go into that. And some just general miscellaneous tips here. Keep your survey short. If you can, low number of questions per single page, because the shorter the better. You get, if every time they click the next button, they save the answer. Just like the last example, don't ask multiple questions in one question. Many software have a progress bar option in the settings, so add that to your survey. And then avoid making questions in the survey required. I see a lot of students, even in my program, who make every question required because they want everybody to answer every single question. But note, if you frustrate the survey taker, they will drop off your survey because they don't want to answer a question and skip it. Use neutral language, be specific and clear. The examples I have here are, instead of asking, how rich are you, which is inserting a little bias because you're assuming they're rich and you're asking by how much, ask, what is your household income? Very neutral, and give them the ranges that they can choose from. And then think about how your information, what information you need. This can help you decide what to cut. So essentially, what is a question that is good to know versus I have to know this to make a decision? And then if it's a good to know type of question and you have a ton of questions, you can cut that type of question. And then I just wanted to comment on distribution method. It's very common that we see for cold emails, for like, say you got a list of a ton of people that you received and you've never reached out to them before, you can expect a 2 to 3% response rate for just a cold email from somebody you never interacted with before. So consider that when you're sending out these mass emails. That means it's all about numbers. And the more you send it out to, the more results you will get, because the percentage of responses is very low. And then I just wanted to end with this very most important survey tip, which is KIS, or keep it simple. The simpler you can make your survey questions, the more responses you'll get. So I flew that a little quickly because I still wanted to hit analyzing data here for everybody. I don't know if we had any questions in that, Gene. If not, I'll kind of fly through this too.
Yeah, no questions in the chat, unless anyone has one right now they would like to ask. Otherwise, I think you have time to go through the analyzing data.
Actually, I have a question.
Great.
Yeah.
So I understand that you're saying to put demographics at the end, because of personal, some people may not want to answer that, or it's not a good way to start, a survey. I guess if you are like posting a survey on like a social media platform, not necessarily like your own social media platform, but like a social media platform that doesn't, have bias within that. If you're like asking for like specific answers from a specific demographic, and it doesn't, and you don't already have that lined out before, I guess, would you still like recommend putting, the demographics at the end, or would you put them at the beginning so that you could file out answers, or kind of have like, checkpoints of like, oh, if this person's on this demographic, then this is like, I forget the term for it, but I know that there's like questions, or I guess weeding out questions. But I don't know if that made any sense.
That makes complete sense. So what you're referring to is like a qualifying question, right? You need to answer it this way to be shown a specific question. So you can filter people. And yes, I would say the demographics being left at the end is more common practice. But if you have a qualifying question, like you want only females to take your survey, you would have to put that in the beginning. So then you can weed out people who don't want to. So I should say that demographics is mainly for if you don't already have an idea of who you want to take your survey and you're just kind of giving it to everybody. But if you can, try and leave as many of those to the end too, because you still want to know, like, okay, if only females are taking this, you may want to know what their household income is or their zip code and things like that. I wouldn't start off with that unless that case that you brought up is what you're trying to do. So
Okay.
Was that helpful? Did I answer you?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. And as many things that I'm giving here too, I might just make the caveat. It's also, it depends. Like everything in life, it's not a hard set rule that you have to follow all these. It's just, this is the best practices to do so you get more results for your survey. And the whole keep it simple too, I'll just mention too about the, filtering out people from taking your survey. What you're doing in that case is you're actually decreasing the number of people who can take your survey. And I always strive my students to say, hey, if you can, don't use logic, see who takes it, see what they think, because you never know what you'll find out. You might find out maybe there is a male audience for your product, right? If they take it and answer it in a way that you weren't suspecting. So I like to keep surveys as open to as many audiences as possible, and then let the data speak for itself rather than limiting it to a specific audience. So that really goes into analyzing data, because once you have the information from your survey, you're really going to have to figure out, what do I do with it? And so your demographics plus the way they answered all the other questions is how you're going to analyze the data, or how I suggest you analyze your data moving forward to make strategic decisions. And I also want to put in here that you want to keep in, the external information you're getting, whether it be qualitative information or the text responses. All this type of information is going to help you with your decision making, because if you just go off of your responses, you might be losing some nuance from the other information taken from the qualitative data. So I only have a few more minutes here, but I'm just going to go quickly through this crosstabs analysis. This crosstabs is a great way to look at your segmenting for your market and who's going to what kind of attributes does your audience have and who's interested in purchasing your product. So for this example here, let me bring out my little pen. There we go. You guys can see that. So for this example, I have a question of how much are you willing to pay for my product? And I had 165 responses. That's what the N stands for. And then these are the answers. Okay, so this row here is 20 plus, 25 people answered it. This row here is $10 to $19. 70 people answered that. This is $1 to $9, 60, and then 0 to unwilling. About 10 people answered that. And then I'm going to break down based on the demographic question. So what this cell is going to be how many females said they were willing to pay $20 or more. This is how many between the age of 35 to 45 are willing to pay $20 or more. So when I fill this in, you'll see here that compared to the number of people who took this and answered it, we have a large amount of females in this category here, $1 to $9. Now, if we were to take a look at the 10 to 19, we see 70 people took it and 29 were female. What that means, 41 were male or preferred not to answer or other category, right? And then 35 to 45, 22, you can see these numbers are lower than how they answered it. So from the conclusions here, a lot of them were also educated with a bachelor's. And a lot of them, if you didn't know, this is Ankeny's zip code, lived in Ankeny. We can make a conclusion here that yes, majority are willing to pay between $1 and 19, but this actually should, instead of males, should say males or, other, not 35 to 45 with a bachelor's in Ankeny are willing to pay 10 to 19. And this gives you the information you need to maybe target a Facebook ad towards this demographic group. Same with this one, $1 to $9. Females, we have 56 out of 60, 48, 56 out of 60, and 48 again out of 60. So we can also assume, if I can let's clear all drawings. Females 35 to 45 with a bachelor's degree in Ankeny are willing to pay up to $9. So by putting your answers by your demographics here, you can get a lot of really good info. Can I have an example here of what ratio data could give you, and this is essentially just the average age. So as you can see from the previous one, where we had not as many people willing to pay $1 to $19, their age were on average 46, and their age here were 38. So that's how ratio data could be put into here, as well as instead of asking a price range, you could ask a price amount for them to type in, and you could have an average here they could go across. So I'm going pretty quickly through this. So if you guys have questions, happy to vet those afterwards. But text analysis, you're basically going to do some categories. You're going to count them by hand, and you're going to spend a lot of time doing that. And there's these other kind of word clouds and different software you can use. The bigger the word, the more frequent that word is used in these word clouds. Here are some free word cloud sites that you can use. And then lastly, I'll just go here. Excel and Google Maps are great ways to show your data, especially when using zip code. Excel has a feature to do that, and Google Maps also has a feature you can do that is free. So with that said, right at 1 p.m. Thank you very much. That's what I got for you today for doing surveys, analysis, and anything related to that. So if you have questions, please feel free to email me. Here's my LinkedIn. You can scan that using your LinkedIn cell phone code. Happy to connect with y'all.
Alex, thank you so much. This was absolutely amazing. You shared so much insightful information, and you're a gem. So thank you so much for sharing all your knowledge on this and your IT expertise. And thanks for everyone for joining us today, and for joining us for the Customer Discovery series. And as a reminder, we've recorded this session. We'll send you a link out tomorrow, and we'll put it on our YouTube channel. And follow up with us or Alex if you have any specific questions. We're glad to help answer those for you. And stay in touch with us at the Papa John Center for Entrepreneurship. We offer a wide variety of programs and events throughout the year, most of which are open to the public. Once again, thank you for your time today and have a great rest of your day. Alex, thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys. Have a good one.
Thank you.